Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and welcome back to a new video. And happy Halloween. It's one of the best holidays of the year, of all time, whatever your picking is. And I thought today I'd cover something really huge because Halloween's one of my favorite holidays. So today we are covering a Mew Essentials chart for black metal. And yes, I did corpse paint for this. Don't judge me. Thought it was cool. So before I do really anything with this review, first of all, if you guys already saw the time, you could probably tell it's going to be a long video. I'm covering 35 albums today, so if you're not interested in that and you just want to piece it out, that's cool. It's really at your own pace here. There's a lot to cover, and I'm really excited for all of it. Now, normally on these charts, I would disqualify things if I found they weren't viable as just part of the genre, because I have covered some niche genres on this channel, mainly black gaze. But for this case, I might say if I find it not essential or essential, which I'm already going to point out. There are a couple albums on here I deem non-essential. Meanwhile, there are a few albums missing from this chart. There are a few artists out there that very much deserve several albums on this chart, while they might only be granted one, which I understand. The creator of the chart wanted to make sure there was only one album per artist, it seems, and he wanted maybe a stylistic change from them, which, while it might not be the group's most iconic album or most essential album, it could be one of their more impactful ones. I'll definitely get into that soon. Also, I won't be disqualifying anything on this list because a lot of black metal elitists will differentiate between whether something is black metal or not at all black metal. That's just a distinction that's hard to make. So just for the sake of this video, I won't disqualify anything based on whether or not it's black metal, at least for my opinion. I'm also going to tell you guys a little bit of history about black metal as a genre, because it goes kind of deep and there's a lot to know about it. So before anything with this chart, I just want to say one of the flaws of the chart that I found mainly is that it's not in chronological order. While most charts you don't really need to be in chronological order, this one, it has a sort of first wave black metal section, and then it goes to more of a second wave, sort of the Scandinavian big revolution in black metal and second wave, and then it's got a big section for a lot of things that follow, with some pieces here and there of different subgenres. It does feel a little random towards the end, and if it wasn't going chronological in this sense, some of it just doesn't really make sense for where it's placed on the chart, but that's really just kind of a nitpick. It's not a big concern. So before this chart even starts, there are a couple albums you might want to check out before even trying to get into black metal if you just want a bigger perspective on the subject. For example, you probably want to check out Black Sabbath, as they really started heavy metal as a genre, and even doom metal with their first record. And black metal definitely takes a lot from doom metal, especially depressive suicidal black metal, atmospheric black metal. There's just a lot of doom influences because there are a lot of slower paced black metal sections. Another important band to check out, you might want to check out Motorhead. They're biker metal, but they're definitely more of a faster paced metal. Also, a good album to just check out for a little perspective on this, Slayer's Rain in Blood. A lot of similarities between Rain in Blood and black metal, especially first wave black metal. Maybe not the later stuff, but the themes of Satanism, the sort of syncopated drum beat that's kind of just back and forth, really thrashy stuff. As first wave black metal is really just thrash metal, but like a slight deviation. But there are some cases where it deviates enough for it to really be considered black metal. And before I cover the actual albums on this chart, just last thing I want to say, if you don't know what black metal is an extreme metal genre like death metal or grindcore or gore grind or some folk metal, but there are a couple of differences. First of all, when you hear death metal, you normally think of pig vocals or more lower growling vocals. Meanwhile, in black metal, a lot of times it's a more wretch sound or even a scream, which has been definitely implemented since the 90s after the main heyday of black metal. Alright, so that is enough really boring exposition. Let's get into the chart. So black metal, as we know it, kind of started in the early 80s with the band Venom and their album Black Metal, when in reality, their first album was also the same sort of black metal style that they were going with, but whether or not you determine that as actual black metal, that's up to you. I personally would not say it is, but it's whatever. So the first actual album that starts off this chart is Celtic Frost's To Megatherion. Now, here's one thing about the placement. Celtic Frost to Megatherion is a good album to start off this chart in terms of style. It does introduce you to the rest of the chart, but there are a couple of issues here. This album came from 1985, pretty early starting point. It's totally fine by me, but Celtic Frost actually used to be a different band known as Hellhammer. They do show up later on this list, and they really should have had the Hellhammer material before this, because the style is pretty similar, and there's really no reason to not have it in chronological order at this point. Also, it's not Venom's albums. Venom should be the first band on this list, but it's kind of whatever, because this album rocks. Now, this album has a pretty black metal guitar tone. It's still kind of brittle, very distorted. It's very appealing. The riffs are really nice, and they definitely resonate with a lot of heavy metal aspects of the time, especially as this did coincide a lot with the new wave of British heavy metal. Now, the vocals, I did not find that harsh on this album. They were kind of thrashy, but that was kind of characteristic of the time, and they were very effective. The track Dawn of Megiddo shows some really good percussion with really good use of double kicks, which, whenever that's implemented in black metal, I just love. About halfway through the album, you definitely get a higher dosage of aggression in the band's sound, resonating a lot with the likes of Motorhead, sort of like a more Eastern European sounding Motorhead, or in this case, Northern European, I guess. And the soundscape here is definitely a lot more epic, maybe even a bit more symphonic. There's only really one flaw I found on this album. The track Fainted Eyes, it has sort of a slap-based section. It reminds me of Dig by Mudvayne, and I know the band didn't know that Mudvayne existed yet, but it's just kind of a cringy association for me, so I didn't particularly enjoy that part. But the rest of this album kind of shreds. It's pretty awesome. That leads us to the next album on this chart, Tormentor's Anno Domini, their 1989 demo. Now, this album sounds very speed metal for the beginning until the blast beats come in, which is highly indicative of the black metal sound. If you've listened to any black metal, you can probably find blast beats on almost any album, bar like a couple atmospheric records. And this definitely took a lot of good black metal tropes right now and really pushed it towards what they would later be for the Norwegian scene, where it's incredibly lo-fi and especially noisy. Some of these tracks are very thrashy and very dark. The track Transylvania sort of starts with a funky little intermission until it actually turns metal later on and became one of my favorite tracks. The track Tormentor 2 had a nauseating, chuggy breakdown. I thought it was pretty amazing. Another thing this album did that was a bit of a trend of sort of first wave black metal, it has these really high gain vocals that you might see on some Burzum stuff, especially Philosophem. The track Apocalypse on this album I was not that big on, as it just kind of fell flat. Really wasn't that exciting for me, but the last two tracks on this album definitely stuck the landing. So that was Anno Domini, and now we're going to take a little trip down to Brazil, actually. So come to Brazil, Sarcophago, with their album INRI. This is their 1987 debut, and it was sort of a part of the Brazilian death scene. Now, the thing about INRI, a lot of people would actually consider it the birth of second wave black metal. I personally have to disagree, as like most people, I kind of believe Darkthrone kind of did that best, with it really being Norway as the true scene of second wave black metal. It's kind of where it has to be. Also, this album definitely has a very punky flair, even more so than the albums we've already covered here. And even by the album cover, as I'm hopefully showing right now, it's pretty punky. And yes, of course, there are the satanic imagery. They're in a graveyard, but they are totally punky, especially with the last track on this album with the sample used at the end, which, mind you, is my only flaw of this album. This album rips. First you got Satanic Lust, where that opening riff is killer. It sounds very punkish at this point in time, but the vocals are dark. There are points of this album where it uses the same sort of edited vocals that Tormentor did on their album just now, but I did find them a little more fun. I found the screams awesome on this album. Whenever they happened, they were great. The way the drums are mixed, I actually found really appealing, where the drums, especially the snare, was really snappy, and a lot of blast beats were used on this album, which I can always appreciate a good blast beat, and here it was definitely great. Something quite common in the first wave black metal scene was that drums kind of had an edited sound, or sometimes they were just really lo-fi. And black metal, of course, is lo-fi. That's characteristic of the genre. You can't be like a cult band and not be lo-fi. You kind of have to have that little fuzz there, which can make it punky or atmospheric. And I think it's strongest in its atmosphere, and here it totally makes it work with the punky sound. There are some bands that don't do this as strongly. They have like an open snare sound that's Saint Anger snare, but here it's not. It's snappy, it hits hard, it's kind of brutal. I found the guitars very much like Slayer at the time, which of course black metal was still kind of thrash metal. Like, they would have called themselves thrash metal at this point in time, and it wasn't until black metal truly became a thing that they could really describe themselves as that, but definitely thrashy. One of the best parts about this album is that the momentum is blistering and unrelenting. It does not stop, it will not stop, and it will run you over. The track Nightmare, the guitar parts are absolutely incredible. They range between Tony Iommi style and Uranus, which isn't always done well. Like, you got plenty of bands that just stick to one style and plenty of bands that go way too far in different directions, and here it's just absolutely perfect, almost like a progressive structure to this track, a little bit like some Mayhem stuff you'll see later. I found the title track to be some very dark and really classic sounding black metal. It was very violent and couldn't have had it any other way. The only flaw, as I mentioned earlier, the ending of Last Slaughter. While Last Slaughter was a really good song, it really pulls you out of the atmosphere, which I can't really blame them for, as the atmospheric style of black metal, or the general feel of black metal, wasn't yet discovered to be the appeal. It has a sample of some guy on the toilet. I did not put it there. I don't want it there. I would have it taken out. But like, it kind of shows you like, hey, look, it's the end, and this is what you get. Other than that, great album. I recommend pretty much everything here. And guys, before we move on, little bit of an opinion I have. I don't believe Venom started black metal. I know everyone says they did, but I think the first stuff was Bathory. And I know everyone out there is like, oh, but Duke, their name was black metal. They talk about Satan in the songs. They do all this. Well, the sound is a lot closer to second wave black metal, which is the archetypal sound in Bathory. And speaking of Bathory, their album is right up now with Bloodfire Death. Now, the thing about Bathory is that people debate whether or not that was the original true black metal sound. They are from Scandinavia with Korthon in the band, but it's debated whether or not it was them or Venom. I still think it's them. The thing with Bloodfire Death is that it sort of coined the idea of Viking metal becoming a thing, which did get a little traction in the 90s, but it was really Bathory's thing after this album. Personally, I would have put Under the Sign of the Black Mark on this chart. I think that's just a better album overall. I think it's darker and the atmosphere works better, and I listen to black metal a lot of the times for the atmosphere, which is its strongest point, because obviously I don't listen to any second wave for the riffs. Those things are very simplistic. It's almost meant to be a little drony in a way. But anywho, Bloodfire Death from 1988. Strong album, let's look at it. So the beginning of A Fine Day to Die does a thing that a lot of black metal albums will do in the future, and it's a pretty atmospheric track, almost ambient in a way. It's got these choral vocals, sounds of horses, and it's really tense, like something's about to happen, until the actual stuff kicks in. And then you got Korthon's vocals that come in. His screams are really nice, highly effective. And I know I'm going to get some flack for this, but I don't like the way Bathory's drums are mixed here. I just think it's not as good. I think the snare just sounds off to me. It almost sounds a little campy, like it's trying to be more epic than it can be, which is a little weird because this album is pretty epic. The whole thing is about Vikings and war and killing people. The track Golden Walls of Heaven is extremely chaotic and violent and thrashy, and it really builds a good sense of atmosphere. You really get pulled into this song. I really like the track Holocaust. It kind of turned to a drone towards the end of it, which black metal is really good at doing with their drony sound effects, and it's no different here. Eventually, we reach the track Bloodfire Death, which is a monolithic track. It is long. This track has an awesome intro with some pretty memorable riffing. This thing really grabs you fast. It's got these really pounding rhythm sections with these noisy guitar blasts. These things are incredible. It's one of the most wicked sounding things I've heard at this point on the chart. And then Bloodfire Death turns into the sort of this galloping rhythm, which I was a really, really big fan of. It turned a little symphonic, and it was pretty inspiring, actually. I felt inspired by this track, which is weird because it sounds so evil, but it was effective. Overall, I thought this album was pretty good. Is it my favorite Bathory record? No, but pretty good overall. Finally, however many minutes in we've reached Venom's second album, Black Metal, which I know it's the title, Black Metal, but they had an album before that was pretty much the same style, so there's really no reason that this has to be here there over Black Metal. It's really just the name. So the opening track I liked a lot. I'm just gonna say it straight up. It has this really noisy part with all this feedback until it's just sliced right through with this guitar part. It's incredibly thrashy as Venom is, but it's really good. I really enjoyed Kronos' voice. While it wasn't as wretched as some of the later black metal material, it's still really effective. The soloing on this album and the guitar tone is definitely, I don't want to say reminiscent, but sort of a precursor to a lot of later black metal. The guitar tone is one of the most black metal portions of this album at this point. The track Buried Alive was really good heavy metal sound. It sounded really dark, and it was a good heavy metal shift. My favorite track on here was actually Teacher's Pet, which, funnily enough, was the darkest sounding track, and it was probably my favorite at the same time, which is actually one of my flaws of the album. I really wouldn't want my favorite track on an album that's meant to be as dark as possible called Teacher's Pet. It just didn't seem right to me. More and more I listened to the parts of this album, it just sounded a lot more like Motorhead, which was, of course, a precursor to black metal, of course, but it does kind of show whether or not you think it actually is black metal. Of course, it's more evil than Motorhead. The song Sacrifice has these really devilish guitar solos. The track Heaven's on Fire is incredibly thrashy, and it has a really nice riff. The track Don't Burn the Witch is incredibly thrashy and really dark, and the album does get kind of rounded out after that, and overall, pretty great. I'll drop the subject after this, but whether or not you consider it black metal is up to you, but despite that, it's a great listen. Is it a little campy or cheesy? Sure. They really didn't sort of buy into the whole aesthetic yet. It's all weird looking leather and kind of new wave of British heavy metal like campiness, but despite all that, it's a great album. Give it a listen. Of course, it is essential. I just have to say it's essential. It's a landmark record. Now, back to Celtic Frost. This is Hellhammer's album, Satanic Rights. This is from 1983, and I could only find it on YouTube for some reason. I was looking for it on Bandcamp. Couldn't find it there, but that's okay. This is their third demo, and the group had no LPs. They had an EP, but this was really all they had. Now, this is one of my favorite albums so far on the chart, kind of because the aesthetic really felt like it was there. It opened with this really menacing intro, and it was actually a little fear-inducing. I kind of got chills. The track Messiah has an incredibly energy-packed opening, and then there is a screech. Now, this does suffer from the first wave of black metal lo-fi qualities, and there's no doubt about that. It is fuzzy as all hell, no pun intended, and it is extremely punky, but I love this because it buys into the aesthetic. Now, of course, it's still incredibly thrashy. Black metal will really be thrashy up until avant-garde black metal comes a thing, but it is more delving into the black metal style that we know and love. I really like the track Buried and Forgotten. The riffs on that one were awesome. The track Uranus, funnily enough, is very thrashy and lo-fi, but it was probably one of my favorite tracks here. The amount of punch behind it was so beyond anything that's come before. The track Reaper is very sludgy, actually, and that was kind of not seen before, and I was a huge fan at this point. I really like the title track. Honestly, that thing could have beaten down a mountain with how heavy it was. And then you had the outro, which is a lot like the intro, which was still great. So Satanic Rights by Hellhammer, awesome demo. absolutely great. And now we're kind of past the more popular first wave black metal bands, and we're delving into a couple of the less popular picks. This band is Master's Hammer with their album Ritual from 1992. Now, this is their debut album, and it's the same year as A Blaze in the Northern Sky by Darkthrone, which is a landmark year for black metal. That is probably the most important year for what's to come. It kicks off with a really ominous intro that leads it to an ominous chord progression, and I really liked the sort of atmosphere that was building here. Had some nice vocal symphonic elements that are prevalent in future black metal, and it was great here. The vocals here were that of black metal, but the riffs were like a sort of chuggy thrash. This album overall feels incredibly malicious. A lot of these guitar lines feel like they're searing into your body. I thought the off-kilter drums on the song, I think Pod Modley is how you pronounce it, were really awesome. Also, I want to talk about the bass tone for a second. It was really rumbly, and I couldn't get enough of it. There is a point where there are clean vocals on this album, which clean vocals do become a lot more prevalent later on, especially in more avant-garde black metal, but here, it just doesn't seem to add anything. It actually pulls me away from the atmosphere. About halfway through the album, the sort of textures behind it become a little bit more uninteresting, and I kind of just get pulled back a little more. Fortunately, the album does pick right back up as it sort of reaches the end. It becomes angrier and angrier as the tracks go by, and as a result, it actually became more fulfilling. So, I don't think this album's perfect, but I did think it was pretty good. So, if you want to be a completionist, totally. And next, we've got Blasphemy's album, Fallen Angel of Doom, from 1990. From Canada. And this isn't just your normal run-of-the-mill black metal album. This is war metal. Now, if you want a fun little history behind war metal, probably check out Go Nilok's video. You know, he covers all that metal stuff that you need to know. But war metal is a type of blackened death metal that, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, it's not great. At least to me, it's not great. It's just very hit or miss with how it works. The way the genre works is that it's even more lo-fi than the black metal that you know and love. It's a little more brutal. The vocals are more death-like, which have never been fulfilling to me. Just seem kind of, I don't want to say lazy, because they definitely take a huge amount of effort, but they just feel like, oh, how do we make it more brutal? Just do this. But yeah, this is from 1990 and from Canada, which I find really funny, because war metal, while it's blackened death metal actually didn't really become a thing until the end of the second wave of black metal, after everything goes down in Norway. So we actually get war metal before second wave black metal. So before real black metal becomes a real big thing, war metal was there. So I just think that's interesting. If you don't, well then, it's tough. It's got a really spooky intro to just kick the whole thing off, and it's gets a lot of energy once the actual songs kick in. And honestly, as I kept listening to this album, it was kind of cringe. Like, I'm all for bestial black metal, but good lord are these guitars buried under the drums. Honestly, a lot of these songs you could have played for me, and I would have thought they were industrial with how little I could pick out. Now, I'm not going to go and say this album is terrible. A lot of these riffs, once I could pick them off, were really good. I mean, death metal is kind of known for incredible riffs, and this album definitely has a few. The track Desecration, you can kind of hear, and it actually sounds kind of okay. And stylistically, funnily enough, I thought this was less far from grindcore than you would think. Black metal having a lot of punky roots, and you just combine it with sort of death metal, and that kind of is grindcore, but it's a little different here. The track Demoniac sounded pretty good for the most part, but I really wasn't big on the growls. I did like the track Goddess of Perversity. It felt kind of like it was whirling around, which I think the band really benefited from a more chaotic sound, so I like that track a lot, actually. So there are definitely some cringe moments on this album. War metal is not my thing, but I thought overall, I really had to call this album okay. I didn't hate it as much as I thought I would, but there is some better war metal out there. This is the last sort of instance of war metal occurring on this chart. So if you want further listening, Baharit with their album Drawing Down the Moon leans a little more towards black metal. I think they're from Mongolia, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But I thought that album was pretty decent. But if you want some stuff that I actually like, Archgoat is a modern war metal band. They are a little less lo-fi, which if that pulls away from the charm for you, sorry, but Luciferian Crown I thought was actually a really good album. And after that, we go back in time quite a bit. We reach the 1983 album by Merciful Fate, Melissa. Now, straight up, if I was allowing myself to disqualify albums here, there's a really good chance I would have disqualified this album, because it really doesn't sound like black metal. It's, sure, it could be speed metal or heavy metal, or even sort of proto-gothic metal, if you're so inclined, but it's really different. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Merciful Fate, the vocalist is King Diamond, who actually is one of the creators of corpse paint as far as we know it. He's had different styles throughout his career. His solo career, he had different styles. I think he currently runs with the upside down crosses all over his face, which is definitely different. But King Diamond has an interesting vocal style, which you could pick out of a whole batch of vocalists. You will immediately tell what he's doing. Of course, he's European. I love his growls. His growls, while they're not like wretched or like completely buried and guttural, they're effective thrashy growls. I like them a lot. But he abuses a really high-pitched sort of vocal thing he does. It's not like Number the Beast with Bruce Dickinson. It's it almost sounds like falsetto usage. I'm not a big fan. I'm gonna be honest. I just don't think it's very appealing. And Rageaholic, he made a big thing about it being an acquired taste, and then he made some crude comment about something really disgusting as an acquired taste. I don't think he understands what an acquired taste means. It means something that you need to try a bit before you like it. And I'm gonna be honest, maybe if I tried King Diamond a bit more, I would like the voice. Right now, I'm not that big on it. Anywho, let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of the album. This is Merciful Fate's debut. So if atmospheric heavy metal was a thing, this would be atmospheric heavy metal. It definitely has atmosphere, it talks about Satan, it has all the dark elements, but it's a lot less thrashy, a lot less gritty, and a lot less terrifying. Now, with how the album starts out, you get a healthy dosage of the King Diamond voice, which I liked at first, but I mean, obviously, it kind of lost its sort of charm on me. It felt very Iron Maiden for the first half of the album, which I like Iron Maiden. It was working well for me. I like the track Curse of the Pharaoh. It felt really heavy. The track Demon Bell is pretty groovy, and it is actually the closest the album seems to get to actual black metal. Of course, it's still a little far, but it's the closest it gets. The track Satan's Fall has some pretty nice growls, which I liked a lot more than some of the other stuff by now. Eventually reached the track Melissa, which has a really healthy dosage of screams and growls, and I think they were pretty effective. So, my thoughts on this album, I think it's okay. Not my thing. I might have to revisit it in the future just to understand what's going on entirely, but if you like it, you like it, and I understand. And now we go to Germany, the thrash metal band Sodom, with their album Obsessed by Cruelty. This is their 1985 full-length debut. Now, this album sort of starts with this kind of no-wave type intro, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I like the style of how it starts. It was really noisy and thrashy black metal, and I do call it black metal. I thought the percussion parts were kind of incredible. I was really digging them. The riffs were very energetic, and they seemed to screech, and the vocals were pretty great. Some of these tracks were kind of weak for me, up until the title track, which actually kind of blew me away. It started with a really doomy and chilling beginning, and I was a little terrified until eventually it goes into this blast beat filled true black metal section, and honestly, this song really felt revolutionary to me, like the genre was really coming into its own more than any other track so far. Now, with this album as a whole, I thought the first side was good, but I found the second side incredible. The riffs just felt better overall. So yeah, I thought this album was pretty great. Sodom is mainly known for their thrash material. They even released an album in 2020, so check this album out. And that is the first 10 albums on this chart. I gotta say, a lot of good stuff. Really not true black metal as we would know it yet, but a lot of good stuff. There are some other recommendations I can say for proto black metal or first wave black metal. Volcano has an album known as Bloody Vengeance. It's got a track called Death Metal that I was just rolling on the floor about. There's a Japanese black metal band that doesn't debut for a little bit later, but it is first wave style. So if you want more stuff, check them out. Also, there are no other Japanese black metal bands on this chart, which I feel like there should be. Japan has a pretty significant black metal scene, as Japan has most metal scenes sort of under its wing. So there should be one or two Japanese black metal albums probably mentioned, but it's fine for what it is. There's a band called Mephisto. They have a compilation known as the Megalomania Puzzle, made of their demos or EPs, Megalomania and the Puzzle. I like the puzzle side more, so if you could find that anywhere, I'd listen to that. But I think it's the second half of the compilation that you'll find on Spotify. I think it's listed as an LP. Anywho, we're out of the woods of first wave black metal, and now we're on to Over with the album Bergtot, their 1994 debut. Now, this is a concept album that was, I think, about some woman in the forest who was in a bunch of danger. It was foreign, language I didn't understand. There was Norwegian, so I didn't really understand it that well. But if you get the concept, I'm sure it's great. Now, the way this album starts is kind of iconic. It's got this incredible drum riff that's just going all over the place until the guitars just rush through. And you really get the second wave black metal sound with a little cleaner guitar tone, but still pretty brittle, and almost an atmospheric quality. Now, this is a little less lo-fi, almost a precursor for some later atmospheric stuff, but we actually get treated to clean vocals. Now, clean vocals can be hit or miss with black metal, but here, they hit, and they hit hard. They are slathered in reverb, but I really dig them here. They sound kind of chilling. This album kind of reminded me of Alcest, actually, but the guitars and the bass were very heavy, and I was really a big fan of them. I found the riffs quite mesmerizing, which was one of their strongest qualities. With tracks like the second track, I'm gonna switch to calling them track at this point because I don't speak the language. It starts acoustic, which is very good folky type sound, which is indicative of plenty of black metal material to come, until it breaks into this blasty tremolo fury, and it feels absolutely oppressive. It's got this symphonic backing with these harrowing vocals, and it's followed by just beautiful singing. Chapter 3 is similar to Chapter 2, with the opening. Chapter 4 started with chanting, which was some good variety on the album. I can always appreciate variety. The final track on this album was really strong black metal type sound, but then it kind of goes acoustic with a sort of acoustic tremolo, which I found really interesting. I don't know why some groups just don't do that. I thought the percussion was really strong on this track, and the whole thing just ends amazingly. So Bergtot by Over, great album. Why it's the first album on the second wave black metal list, I don't know. It is definitely essential though, as many of these albums have been so far, but totally give it a listen. I would actually probably say this is one of the better albums to get into black metal with. Is it the best black metal album, and therefore you could listen to that and then just get thrown into the scene? I'd say no, but you might like it a little more than I do. Now, also in 1994, we have reached my personal favorite black metal album of all time, Vis Liceta Os by Burzum. I've even got the shirt. That's how much I dig these guys. I have this album on CD. This album is incredible. Don't know why I said these guys. It's one guy, Varg Vicarnus. Now, I'll get into the history of second wave black metal a little bit in a sec, but Varg has 4 killer albums as Burzum in the 90s. Self-titled, incredible. Some of the most chilling tracks ever. Despel Omega is also amazing. This album is my favorite of all 4. I'll get to why in a second, but Philosophem is also incredible. Now, while I consider Vis Liceta Os my favorite Burzum record, I think Philosophem is actually a better jumping in point. It's definitely a little hookier, where songs like Dunkelheit and Yes You Todd have just incredibly iconic riffs. You listen to it one time and that thing hooks you. And we've reached the point on this chart where black metal is not riff focused, and it's a lot more wave of sound focused, and it's meant to sort of like sink you in. But Philosophem is a little more conventional with the style there. The only issue with that album is that the last track is like 25 minutes of dungeon synth. I was able to get through it the first time. If you don't like that, that's you. But I love that album. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Hivisa Seta Os, the best black metal album of all time. You start off with the 14-minute track Det Samenging Var, which is the name of the previous Burzum album, but the track is here. It starts the trend of the album of being absolutely oppressive. And this thing has these amazing drum groove, and it's got this guitar thing with the synths that are just totally chilling and just feel destructive and incredibly oppressive. This album is sad. This is one of the most isolating albums I've ever heard, and I've listened to depressive suicidal black metal when it was a thing. Now, if there's any criticism at all that you can give to this album, Varg's vocals are a little interesting here. They sort of sound almost yelpish and very pained. There is a purpose behind this. This album is entirely about abandonment and almost imminent death. This thing feels so sad, and the vocals really match the tone. It almost sounds like he's getting tortured to death. But if you don't get with the vocals, I do understand. But at least get with it for the riffs and the synth leads and the atmosphere. Mwah, chef's kiss. This thing kills it. After the first track, you get the title track, which gets right into the action. And this thing feels sickeningly spiteful. You will feel betrayed with this track. And while I've already listened to this album a few times before, I did not think this album was going to hit me as hard as it did with a repeat listen, but it hit me really hard, and I didn't even have anything in my situation to affect me. This thing is just that powerful. The third track is punchier and a little bit more towards the point. I think it's the shortest track on the album, but I'll have to double check that. It's a little bit of a deviation from the rest of the more lengthy tracks here, but you still feel betrayed. Also, I think the storyline behind it is a little different. I think it's about a knight coming home to find everything is desolate. Really sad stuff, almost kind of Seventh Seal. Now, after these tracks, we get a healthy dosage of dungeon synth with the track Tombhet, and it is spelled Tomhet. But if you've never had an intro to dungeon synth before, this track is perfect. It does switch halfway through, as a good dungeon synth track might do, but this thing schools everything on the latest Burzum record. I actually reviewed that a few months ago. But Tombhet is amazing. That thing is chilling, and it really feels like everything was laid to waste and you're dying. And it's all over. I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I will be happy if you stop watching the video and go listening to this album. I know I've got like 20 albums left, but this thing, incredible. Following that album, we get Mayhem, De Mystery Stom Satanas. Now, little historical tidbit, I'll just explain quickly for you guys. A lot of you have probably heard it before, but black metal second wave history is very interesting. So basically you got Darkthrone, who started the scene, and following them was Mayhem with a kind of revolving lineup in their band. They have a very revolving lineup with no consistent members, but today we do have a couple original members, mainly Necro Butcher, the bassist. So basically what happened in Norway is Mayhem was a band with the guitarist Uranus. Uranus really started the second wave black metal scene by capitalizing off the death of their lead singer, Dead. Dead was the guy who popularized corpse paint in the world of black metal. He actually had a condition where he had a near-death experience as a child, so he kind of believed he was dead in actuality. So he did a lot of crazy things before stage antics. This dude was like black metal Gigi Allen in a way, except he didn't really hurt anybody, he just hurt himself. The following antics include burying his clothes for weeks so that they would rot and he'd put them on for the stage, putting a dead animal in a paper bag and inhaling the fumes, and mutilating himself on stage. And I mean mutilating himself. Knives, bottles, you name it. So basically, Dead had a serious bout of depression, and the guitarist Uranus, he tried to capitalize on this. So he convinced him to essentially commit suicide with a shotgun in the house where the band recorded. Uranus found the corpse, took a picture of it, and used it for the album cover of the bootleg Dawn of the Black Hearts. You can find it if you look it up. It's gore, though, so if you're not used to that, don't look it up. With this being such a big thing, Necro Butcher found out, and he left the band as Uranus was being a terrible person and using this as an album cover. So Necro Butcher leaves the band, and their vocalist Dead is, well, dead. So they needed a new bassist and a new vocalist. Fortunately, an up-and-coming artist in the scene, Varg Vicarnus of Burzum fame, was just ready to get picked up. So Euronymous scouted him out and said, hey, come be our bassist. And he said, sounds awesome. Let's do it. And the new vocalist they picked was Attila. Now, I'm just going to say straight up, from the things I've heard of Dead, which there are a few recordings, a lot of really lo-fi live stuff, which is really hard to get through, but you could totally hear Dead's voice. It's incredible. Like, it's better than Attila's voice, in my opinion. Just the way Attila sounds is very unique, of course. It's sort of a little more lower and a little more guttural, but still completely wretched and terrifying. But Dead straight up feels undead, like a zombie on the stage. It's better. That's just what I'm saying. I might be a little biased, as I think the story here is awesome, but I think Dead's a better vocalist. Anywho, so the album is going cool. They're recording it, doing all these things, and then the band has a little hiatus because Euronymous says to someone, I forget who, that he wants to tie Varg up to a tree and torture him to death. Euronymous has done some scummy things in the past, so Varg believes this. Varg tracks him down and kills him. He breaks into his house. I think he knocks on the door, actually, and they get in a fight. Euronymous tries to get away after he knows he's going to lose, because Varg was huge, honestly. And then Varg proceeded to stab him over 30 times. I think. I don't know the number. Anywho, Varg kills the man. Varg is gone for about a couple weeks until he's arrested for like 10 years and then releases Dungeons and Albums in jail. But De Mysteries is not released yet. Euronymous has his funeral, and the parents actually ask Necrobutcher and Hellhammer to re-record Varg's part so that he wouldn't be on the album. They said no. You've got a landmark album here. This thing is a historical landmark in music form. You got two people on here that are some of the most influential people in the black metal scene. You've got an incredible drummer. You've got a bassist who killed the guitarist, who caused the previous lead singer to off himself while he started the black metal scene, and a vocalist that was Attila. He was there, kinda. So basically the band's intention of releasing it in this way was they wanted the murderer and the guy who died on the same album to be released. And the album cover, as you can probably see, is actually a church that Varg planned to burn, because he was known for committing arson. If you see the album cover for Osk, Burzum's first demo, that is a church that he burned down. This next church was what Varg was planning on burning down, so this dude's crazy, and now they got an album about the whole thing. So that's enough history, let's get into the content. So I'm gonna be honest, the album starts off with the track Funeral Fog. In my opinion, this is the worst track, and it's a bit of a filter. So if you get past it, you do find the real meat of the album. You get a lot better tracks after this, but Funeral Fog is nothing to scoff at. It is plenty great. It's got a very dark riff, some nice syncopated drum parts. This thing's pretty awesome, but forget all that. Next thing we reach, Freezing Moon. I'm gonna be honest, Freezing Moon is the most important black metal song, maybe other than Life Eternal. That's of all time. That's not for Mayhem, that's for all time. And just to tell you how good the song is, here's my good friend Bridget with their opinion on the song.
It's good.
So yeah, Freezing Moon is awesome. It's got a bit of a proggy sort of structure with the way it goes. I love it. I'm going to skip ahead to Life Eternal. Life Eternal is a very important track, as Dead had the lyrics on his suicide note. So pretty important thing here, but this track is as malicious and ominous as they come. It has these winding bass lines and screaming guitar solos from Euronymous. Euronymous was a shredder. So I'm not going to beat around the bush here. This is the most essential album on this whole list. If you don't listen to this album, you don't know black metal, and what are you doing? It's really good too. If you can get past the vocals, you'll love it. This thing's awesome. Listen. Now, after that, we have Darkthrone, Transylvanian Hunger. Now, this is a totally opinionated thing. There are 3 Darkthrone albums, maybe even 4 if you include Panzerfaust, that could totally be on the spot. I would say Blaze in the Northern Sky is more essential, as it really kind of kicked off the second wave scene, but that's opinionated. Now, Transylvanian Hunger is great. I'd say my favorite of the 3, but is it without flaw? I'd say no. The way it's structured is kind of interesting, where black metal is known for tremolo guitar picking and blast beats. This album is entirely that. Not a lot of variation. maybe 99% of the album is all that, and then maybe you might hear a different cymbal hit every blue moon, really. You get the long title track, which is as cold as ice, and it throws you into the mix, and it's really atmospheric and really effective. I love the guitar tone. The drum work is great, very consistent, very awesome. Apparently it's about dead. Rest in peace. You had a great song written about you. I like the bass tone a lot here. It feels really buzzy, almost biting in a way. The vocals on this album are great. They're almost primal feeling. I love them. The only real differentiation between the A-side and B-side is that the B-side is a little more gothic sounding in the way it kicks off. I like the 7th track on this album. It really felt as malicious as the album got. Very good stuff. So yeah, this album is great. Classic. The 2nd through 4th Darkthrone albums are incredibly essential for black metal. Next we reach the band Satiricon with their 1993 debut, Dark Medieval Times. Now this album for me hit harder when you were in the mood of spite, but it's kind of up to you with however you're feeling at the moment. So it starts off with this really dark ambient intro, and it turns kind of classical feeling for a bit. I liked it a lot, but it does turn into more black metal about a minute or so in, with some symphonic vocals backing it, it's a tried and true method at this point, and it works well. This album's got a lot of acoustic stuff balanced with black metal things that it sort of switches between, and I'm a big fan of how it's working so far. I kind of want to describe the last track for a bit. It has a nice layer of atmosphere, which has a really good way of sending off the album. Basically how I feel about this album, it was pretty great. A couple points, it did pull me out just a little bit. I don't think it's as effective as the other albums that I've discussed in the second wave so far, but overall pretty great. All right, now we are kind of sort of approaching later second wave black metal territory. This is right before things turn avant-garde, right before things go into depressive suicidal territory, or sort of like black and death. Various different subgenres start to come out of the end of the second wave of black metal that dominate third wave black metal. So the next album we're talking about is Dal Guldur by Summoning. Now, I'm going to say straight up, I like this album, but I think a better album is Stronghold. I think Stronghold was really good overall. There were just a couple bits where the synths actually sounded poppy for a bit when the vocals cut out, but the atmosphere set up by this album is pretty great. I think Dal Guldur is not as good as Summoning, but there are a few things to talk about with this band that are so iconic with their style that I just can't go any further without saying it. First of all, hyper atmospheric. This thing, the guitars are so drawn out, they're almost unrecognizable. The synths just clutter this whole thing. This thing is like half synths. It's really to the brim with this style. So this album is over an hour long, and a lot of Summoning records are long, so you just kind of got to brace for a bit, but it is pretty gratifying. So the first track starts with a nice synth-filled intro that feels dark and gothic. It does feel a little cheesy, and I'd be lying if I said it doesn't at all, but it does definitely get you in the feeling. The second track has a pretty awesome guitar riff that has this really spaced out, I think, electronic drum riff in the back that's filled to the brim with reverb. And I think the drums on pretty much everything from Summoning that I've heard so far are really reverbial and a little fake. They seem electronic, and if they're not, I will be shocked. But they almost always have a really slow marching pace, and they tend to be effective for what's trying to happen here. The track Elfstone is to the brim with symphonic elements, which, if that's your thing, totally check this song out. I really recommend it a lot. I think the ending of this track did not rub me the right way nearly as well, but overall, solid track. The track Kaza Doom has this opening synth lead that's really quite mesmerizing and entrancing as you get into the track, and it sets you up for a pretty long one. Honestly, the album as a whole can be a little tough to sit through at times, as this thing, you're meant to ride it, and it's just so symphonic, and a lot of it is drawn out. Like, these tracks are not short in any way, shape, or form, but what they are is pretty effective. Maybe I got a little filtered here, but I did think this album overall was pretty good. Just a little side note I want to mention, I've been kind of forgetting to list out these extra recommendations, but if you like Summoning and you like Burzum, one band I gotta recommend that is not on this list but should be, Paysage d'Hiver. I'll probably list it right here on the screen. really good atmospheric black metal. That thing is as lo-fi as it gets. It almost feels like you can't quite tell that the drums are in. Like, it's double kicks for a lot of their stuff, but it's a brick of sound. And if you like summoning, you might like Paysage d'Hiver. It's a bit of a different take on the idea of like heavy symphonics and heavy atmosphere, but I love it. Now we reach ISA by the band Enslaved. This is something I was very confused about at this point on the list. We are still kind of in second wave black metal territory, but this album is from 2004, so I don't know why it's here yet. Also, this is their more progressive rock styled album. Yes, it's black metal, but there are some little jazzy licks here and there, and the thing is prog structured for sure. So this is by no means their most essential album. Enslaved has a treasure trove of little albums here and there, but this isn't the 90s, it's a prog thing, which progressive black metal is not as popular as the other subgenres, so I'm not sure why there necessarily has to be as big of a mentioning at this point in the chart. But nevertheless, let's get into if this album is good or not. So there's a very eerie opener before you get Lunar Force, which is a heavy track with really heavy tremolos with keys in the background that are really nice. And it feels very sad. I didn't really expect the proggy portions, but they were a really good palate cleanser, and I think stylistically it worked well on the album. The title track on this album was pounding and kind of mesmerizing, and the proggy elements worked so well in fact, that it made me sad about the current state of neo-prog, because I don't know how many times I mentioned this, but I think neo-prog is just soy, and it's kind of cringe. This is a lot better if we're going towards the direction of neo-prog. Do something like this. So what do I think about this album? It's non-essential for this point in the album listing. Maybe even non-essential for essential black metal overall. Like, you could have 100 black metal albums with repeats. I don't know if I put this one on here, but it's pretty good. I actually recommend it if you want to get into black metal from a prog standpoint. I think it's a totally fine pick. Now we reach Gorgoroth with their 1996 EP, Antichrist. This is the only EP on the list, which is a little weird, because the shortest album at this point was Bergtot by Over, I'm pretty sure. And that one was over a half hour long, and this one's like 20-something minutes long. It's definitely an outlier, so it's a little weird in that regard. Regardless, this thing's dope. Now, just real quick, I probably would have put Pentagram at this part on the list, rather than an EP. Nothing wrong with an EP, it's just foreign to what's happening on this list. Yeah, plenty of demos, but a lot of these demos are a half hour long or longer. I digress. Let's get into the track listing. The intro is very eerie in its instrumentation, and it feels like a dungeon. But eventually we reach these crushing and doomy descending riffs that are oppressive and highly impactful. It feels punishing and a little depressing. One thing about this album I liked a lot was that there was a subtle atmospheric quality to it with these synths that were a little buried. Well, I don't want to say buried, more subtle, actually. And they were really impactful to the tracks overall. Just whenever they were there, they brought it to another level. Some of this EP actually reminded me of Burzum Self-Titled, but that should kind of speak towards its quality. This thing is awesome. Now we reach Windear's Arntor from 1999. This is the group's second album, and this is a good example of a little more atmospheric sound, but definitely Viking metal, because this thing is about a classic adventure where a Viking dude goes and kills some trolls. So the opening track sounds really sick. It's actually got an accordion part, I'm pretty sure, which totally like out of nowhere, but it's awesome. So this album, as you might have noticed by now, is a concept album about a guy who I think goes on a journey to fight some people, and he eventually dies at the end. So it's a little sad with the way it ends, but it's uplifting. And it's kind of strange for a black metal sound, and I do mean a black metal sound, tremolo, blast beats, the whole nine yards, and the wretched, depressing vocals. This thing's rather uplifting. The track Burial was very synth-filled until eventually the sort of black metal elements just kind of punch through, and it really fills up with this atmosphere. One thing interesting about the atmosphere behind this album is that a lot of it sounds snowy, but not necessarily destroyed, and a lot of black metal does sound destroyed. Hivissa Seta Os, a lot of Paysage d'Hiver material, even their dungeons and stuff. Like, a lot of it goes as far as to be depressing and just wrecked, but it really doesn't need it. here it's just snowy and it feels kind of ominous and interesting. The last track on this album actually is a bit proggy in nature, with its sections, which I always dig. Basically, this album's fun. If you don't want black metal to be fun, you can give this album a skip. I don't know if I'd call it essential. It's not as popular as a lot of these other albums on the list, but I thought it was actually pretty great. And next we reach another essential album, Immortal's Pure Holocaust from 1993. Now this is their second album. It's 33 minutes long, and Immortal has quite a colored discography. They have another album that I forget the name, but it's a little more power metal influenced when I heard it myself, but it is a great album. I do like Pure Holocaust more though. I like my black metal a little more dark. I can take power metal stuff, I just do prefer the darker material. So this album starts off with this really cool syncopated drum rhythm until eventually it goes into this heavy tremolo guitar that is paired, of course, with one of Abbott's best screams. Really nice opening. And kind of characteristic of Immortal, this album is cleaner than a lot of black metal for the time. Black metal is known as being, of course, lo-fi, but Immortal, they do kind of distance themselves from the typical lo-fi sound of the aggressive corpse paint black metal. And it is a little cleaner, and it's their style, and I like it. I think it's very effective. It's still dark, it's still aggressive, it's still violent, it's still depressing, and it works perfectly. And the riffing on this album is pretty nice too. It can range from depressive suicidal black metal all the way to power metal. So the range is really nice. There are these symphonics that are rare and on occasion, but whenever they're there, they're welcomed. This is a shorter album at around 33 minutes long, which if you want a digestible black metal album that you can load into your car before you drive somewhere and just fist pump the whole way there, and you get there and you're mad and you're ready, this is the album for you. This album's great. It's dark, it's heavy, it's violent, of course through the title. Awesome. Can't recommend it enough. And now to cap off sort of the more traditional black metal stuff from the second wave, you do sort of dive a little more into symphonic black metal with Emperor's debut album, The Nightside Eclipse. This album's from 1994. A lot of people would say that Emperor is one of the best black metal bands out there. Definitely true. Their material is very skillful and incredibly good. A lot of really interesting riffs, and they really thought a lot of their material through. For their 4 albums, they're all known to be at least good, and most of them are great. I have listened to Anthem as the Welkin at Dust, their second album. Personally, I actually don't really like that album that much. Before you try and burn my house down for that, the reason for that is that the symphonic sort of synthetic horns on that track, or that album rather, just didn't really suit me. I mean, I can usually go without symphonics that aren't vocals, but to each their own. A lot of that album is strong, but this album is better. It starts with this paralyzing atmosphere through a little more ambient piece, which was really effective, and it puts you in the right mood. I thought the symphonics on this album, being vocal, were gorgeously malicious in comparison to the later efforts, so I was totally down to hear this all over. Halfway through this first track, the chord progressions were incredibly dark and effective. I was kind of in love with them. It felt like they really thought through the album, almost like they had black metal theory just ingrained in their brain. The track Cosmic Keys start with this crazy synth and guitar line, which really brought the track sort of into its own. The track Great Vast Forest, like many other tracks on this album, start and then switch to an even darker sound after the beginning of the album, which I'm a big fan of the switch-ups, so I thought it worked very, very well. I couldn't mention this album without the track I Am the Black Wizards. That thing's opener, just listen to it yourself. That thing kills. There are parts of this album that I could sort of determine were a little Viking metal-y, but overall was really good. This album is great, incredibly essential. A lot of people would say this is one of the best black metal albums of all time, and I myself wouldn't put it up as high as some of the other things I've loved so much so far, or more avant-garde material later, but it's great. Definitely give it a listen. And now we reach Sacramentum's debut album, Far Away from the Sun. So this album's in 1996, and I already mentioned war metal, but this is a different Blackened Death here. Now, the thing with Blackened Death is that it's a cleaner style of black metal that is a lot more death metal influenced, and if death metal has anything over black metal, it's interesting riffs. And somehow it still maintains the atmosphere that is just awesome. So this album doesn't screw around. It starts and then it's immediately punching you in the face with an amazing guitar line. And the tone is pretty awesome. The riff is rather hypnotic and depressing, and the songs transition seamlessly. This whole album you can listen to all the way through and never feel a hitch. The riffs are kind of depressive suicidal in a way, with a bit of a brighter edge to it, a little black gaze-ish, forgive me, but they are definitely a little brighter, and they do have a lot of appeal in that idea. A lot of this sounded like a better version of Immortals at the Heart of Winter, just brighter and a little more skillful. Something I liked about this album is that blast beats were used very sparingly, which were so impactful. With the way they were used, they were just thrown in to reach an emotional peak of sound, which awesome stuff. I think it's a really great idea, and it couldn't work better. I'm gonna be honest, Sacramentum's album here was one of my favorites on the list. Definitely check it out. A really good start to black metal, actually, as the style is less lo-fi. So if you can't get with the lo-fi stuff, listen to this first and then see if you can get the other things. So continuing on the idea of blackened death metal, we have Dissection with Storm of the Light's Bane. This is their 1995 album, their second one. Rest in peace, their band member John. A little bit of controversy. The guy John in the band, he committed murder, as a few black metal people have in the past, and so their discography is a little light on material, but what's there is pretty good. I mean, is what John did in real life good? No, he did murder a guy. He's kind of bad for that, but this is a good album. So if you can separate the art from the artist, I do implore you to check this album out, especially if you're into death metal, as the instrumentation is pretty death. It starts with an ambient guitar piece that does set the tone for later on. And one thing I gotta mention about this album, it's filled to the brim with riffs, just blistering drum speed. Everything here, honestly, overwhelmed me a little bit from time to time. The first track I found a little more balanced, but after that, it just felt a little too much. Not to say it wasn't all effective. It was really only a snippet here or two on the track listing that I just wasn't totally on board with, but what was there was great. There are blast beats here, and they only kick in every once in a while, which the sparing use of the blast beat is tasteful, and I love it. But when they're here, they are so fast. It is incredible. The track Thorns of Crimson Death might be my favorite track on this whole album. It just feels more consistent, and for some reason the mixing actually sounds better somehow. I can't really explain, but I'm a big fan. I thought this album overall was really good, strong material. If you want your instrumentation as packed as possible, this is the album for you. The next album we're covering actually starts a trend that I'm a big fan of on this chart. It goes from the traditional black metal sound into avant-garde metal. This band is Ved Buens, and I butchered that name, but this is their album Written in Waters from 1995. It's their only full length. So this album I found really influential on later albums, which I'll get to the stuff that it sounds like later, but it's really interesting with its production choices. Also, the riffs on this thing, while not always tremolo, are really interesting because they're just as abrasive as typical black metal riffing, because it's so beyond angular. A lot of this stuff actually sounded really similar to math rock somehow. When the tremolo does come in, they're very subtle and fuzzy and incredibly haunting. There are a lot of clean vocals on this album, which are great, and they're really fun and interesting, but when the wretched vocals do eventually come in, I like them as well. One thing I really liked about this album is that it was really intoxicating in the way it went. It really made you feel like you were being hypnotized by the whole thing. Yeah, this album was very interesting. If you want a different take on the black metal style, this is totally for you. It's on Spotify, so give it a listen. What are you doing? This thing's awesome. I loved it. Great album. Next, we got the band Talk with the 99 debut. I am not even going to attempt that album title, but I hope you could spell it because it's great. So this album wastes no time throwing you into the mix, but it's really awesome with what it's got. But it is packed to the brim black metal. This thing is blistering. There are a lot of clean vocals on this album. When they show up, they're great. But the harsh vocals work really well with the way it's mixed. Just the sonic qualities of it are really awesome. The track 2 I find even more unrelenting and even crushing. And just the way the atmosphere is built on this album is so effective. The third track definitely seems more pagan in nature and definitely mystical, which was really appealing. But after this point in the album, it starts all descending lower and lower and lower into sadness. And by the 6th track, it's gone so far down, it feels like it abandoned the sadness and has been so crippled that it just turned to complete chaos and madness. The track 7 starts with this sort of like chaotic style until eventually it almost reverts back to first wave black metal with the riffing and the violence behind it. It seems like we have a main character who has descended so far down into chaos that his only option is violence at this point. Of course, this is not what the album is actually saying. Don't take my word for it, but this thing is amazing. This thing will emotionally drain you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've broken into the 2000s. So this next album comes from 2000. It's the band Weakling's only release, Deadest Dreams. So this album is really long, and it's only 5 tracks, so you got some real slow burners here. So the way the first track is absolutely horrifying. It almost sounds like people are coming to basically destroy your land and steal your crops, as the title would suggest. The amount of influences taken into consideration on this album are really interesting. There's definitely some depressive suicidal, a little progressive, a lot of atmospheric, just all around crushing. The track Deadest Dreams is really interesting. Feels almost proto-black gaze at a point, but it sort of continues morphing and morphing throughout the album until it drones out, which you see on a few tracks on this album. They know how to drone. The track Battlefield almost reaches Uranzi Pazuzu levels of wrecked and insane. The 4th track builds and builds until a chaotic break where you struggle to keep up with the speed of it and you feel a little overwhelmed, which was intentional, but it's very effective. The final track on this album starts off very discordant, and then it keeps morphing, as these tracks have been known to do. It tends to drone until it sounds incredibly tortured and you almost want to give up. And then eventually this track reaches a point where there's a mini guitar solo that's easily one of the noisiest things I've ever heard in my life. Basically, I could go on and on about this album, but I don't need to do that to tell you that it's great. This thing is tortured, it's creative, and it's incredible. The next album is the Ukrainian band Drudk, or Druth. I'm gonna be honest, I looked up how to pronounce the name. Everyone has a different idea on how to do it, so it's spelled like that. This album is Autumn Aurora. It's the 2nd album. The track Fading starts off with this really nice reverbed out acoustic line, which I thought was very incredible with the way it really set the mood. I didn't mention this yet, but this is an atmospheric black metal album, and believe me, it really does build atmosphere, but not necessarily dark atmosphere. It feels almost kind of at peace with nature. The track Summoning the Rain has a very impactful Viking metal-esque sound, but still very, very heavy and yet not too discouraging or oppressive. It goes right into Glare of Autumn, which this track has some more atmospheric acoustic lines to it, which is one of my favorite tracks, as it sort of is just a really good example of really interesting concepts explored here. The track Sunwheel is filled to the brim with these wretched vocals that are as abrasive as the album gets, but it feels actually very bright, which is one of my favorite parts of the album, is how they can take such depressing vocals and yet lift them in a really interesting way. The track has these building drum fills, which are really nice and emotionally impactful. This album, in a way, really achieves what black gaze really tries to do, but here, honestly, I found it effective in a lot of black gaze. Wind of the Night Forests is a track that feels very galloping, and it's sort of a brighter, sort of black gaze-ish idea, kind of similar to Woods of Desolation and the ferocity behind it. The album ends with the track First Snow, which is this ambient guitar piece, which I thought was a pleasant way to end the album. It's strange considering that this is a great black metal album that feels rather pleasant, so it's very interesting. And now we have reached some truly interesting, and I mean interesting and impactful avant-garde black metal material here, with Mirror Throne's album Carriers of Dust. This is the band's second album from 2006, and it is only 4 tracks long. Now, before I say anything about this band, there was a supposed connection to NSBM, which is a black metal subgenre that is actually white supremacist in nature. First of all, I do not agree with any opinions from any National Socialist black metal group. And actually, neither does Mirror Throne. The first song is titled Scream to Express the Hatred of a Race, which, that sounds racist, and understandably why, but it is actually about the human race as a whole, and not any specific race. Which, thank goodness it's not a song about racism, because it's actually really great. So as far as black metal goes, this track has really, really good production, and it works well. It's some weird angular stuff going on here. It feels kind of harrowing. The sort of symphonic proggy elements on this track actually made it kind of fun. The vocals on this album are a mixed bag of more guttural death metal type vocals and more wretched black metal type vocals, as avant-garde metal tends to do. There is also a really impressive technical ability behind much of the material here. It actually feels incredibly gothic and chilling, which I was a really big fan of. The second track is the shortest on the album, but the way it's constructed punches just hard enough to be almost like an intermission track that sets you up for the rest of the album. It's a really good palate cleanser. Skipping to the last track on this album, it sort of rounds itself off with this anxiety-inducing, really punishing track that's filled to the brim with all these parts that just beat you down. It really caps off the album very well. Fantastic avant-garde metal album. This is a great thing to listen to. Next up is Negura Bunget's 2006 fourth album, Om. Like most albums, the first track on this album is ambient, and it's a great way to set you up for the rest of the album. The track Tesaru is really awesome atmospheric black metal that really throws you in pretty effectively, and the way it builds is really, really awesome. But one of the things about this track that I liked a lot is that it quickly turns darker and mysterious, which this is a folk-inspired album. You definitely hear a lot of Romanian instruments, which was a really nice thing to add to the album. And the thing is, I like how much atmosphere they also added. The fourth track on this album, as well as a few others, have a really satisfying noisy breakdown, which is kind of alien to a lot of black metal, but the way it's incorporated here is really effective. A lot of this album is surprisingly menacing, which at the beginning it did seem a little more mystical and less dark, but it just descends and descends and descends. This album tends to go from atmospheric black metal to avant-garde to like these gorgeous folk portions in a snap, and very, very effectively. It never feels like it catches a snag anywhere. So yeah, this album's great. Really, really essential. Next we got Wolves in the Throne Room's Two Hunters from 2007. This is another 4-track album, and if anything on this whole chart I would describe as black gaze, it's this album. You got the first track on this album that sort of washes over you in sound, but it does quickly turn sour, and that is in a good way. It's dark. It has these strings that fill in with this sort of funeral march. So yeah, the drums are very slow, but it's got this sort of methodical pace that it's just trotting throughout the track. It's very depressing, but incredibly gorgeous. The next track kicks off with this slow and very spacious guitar, which, if you're into the soundscapes, this is really for you. The blast beats do kick in eventually, and they do have an emotional impact. The track Cleansing starts off very slow and tribal sounding until eventually it switches into this really hardcore and abrasive black metal sound that I thought was implemented very well. Unfortunately, the last track, while it is strong overall, it does seem to lose momentum, but that is just my opinion right now. That could definitely change in the future, and I definitely see it changing. I thought this album was pretty good overall. So the next band we have is Gris, with their only album from 2007. Now, this album is 6 tracks long, and this band is from Canada, Quebec specifically, so it's all in French, so I don't know the track names. One thing I like about this album a lot is that the guitar tone is very Burzum-esque, and I'm just such a fanboy of Burzum that I'll pretty much eat whatever Varg throws at me right up. So what was here was sounding really awesome. The first track's riff actually sounds like Dunkelheit, and I eat that album up, so I'll take it. The second track is really effective in its pacing. It starts off with this slow, funeral dirge pacing until around 4 minutes in, it breaks into this really rapid and searing blast beat filled just punch to the face black metal just series of riffs and aggression, and it was placed really well. It's also got some really nice riffs to boot. The third track, in another clear homage to Burzum, is another slow burner that it feels almost like you're withering away under snow. The atmosphere built here is really awesome. The last track is actually all instrumental of piano and strings, so if that's what you're into, you like that. I mean, obviously, you could just be in it for the black metal and then you just skip out on that track. I really don't recommend that, though. It's actually a really beautiful piece here. Gris's album is actually one of my favorite albums on this whole chart, so totally check it out. Next, we reach the controversial band Despel Omega's third full-length album, C Monumentum, blah, 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 blah. There's a lot of words. This is their 2004 album, and the first in the series of 3 albums that ends in Paracletus. And I'm just going to tell you straight up, Paracletus is a better album than this one. You can skip this one and go straight to Paracletus. That album's awesome. But this band is a little controversial, as the singer has been known to be a part of porno grind groups, so his lyrics are gross. I think intentionally so. But he's known to have some pretty controversial ties, but he does have no creative expression in the band, so people feel a little less guilty for listening to them for that reason. So this album is really unique in its prayer tracks, which are a little more ambient, filled with chanting. First, second, and third prayer are all a little different, but they're also very haunting, and I was actually really grateful for them as a reprieve, where some bands have intermission tracks that just suck. Here is not the case. They're actually some of my favorite parts on the album. Yet tracks like Sola Fide in here, which are really evident of more modern black metal type sounds. This album sounds revolutionary in the way that it sort of shifts towards the more modern, slightly less lo-fi sound that a lot of people are more used to nowadays. The track Carnal Malafacter is the longest track here. It starts really slow and really dark, and it has this really intense part where it has a break for Gregorian chant. And then it goes into the most chaotic part of the album, where there are more blast beats than before, and it's just extremely oppressive. The album ends with Malign Paradigm, which is a really nice riff-filled outro. Overall, this album was pretty good. Not everything hooked me like I hoped it would, like Paracletus did, but overall very effective. The next album is the 2008 debut from Cold World, the album Melancholy Squared. Now this is a depressive suicidal black metal album, and it shows with its track lengths and topics. The album starts off with the track Dream of a Dead Sun, which starts off with this really slow and drawn out guitar, which is really beautiful and really one of the good reasons to listen to depressive suicidal black metal. A lot of these vocals sound distant and hopeless, which is one of the best parts about them. The track Tortured by Solitude's lyrics, or vocals rather, are so piercing that it's a little oppressive and hard to stand through. Not that they weren't incredibly effective, because believe me, they were. Basically, this album's pretty good overall. The main flaw is that the last track, the first half of it, almost sounds like some experimental like house or like trip hop or something. I really don't know how to explain it. Of course, it does go back into the black metal stuff from earlier, but the first half is bizarre. This next album is Peste Noir with their first album, and if there's any band I need to have a disclaimer about, it's this one. So Peste Noir is they're racist. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. They're not National Socialist black metal necessarily. They are looped around with them, but their political views do differentiate a little bit. But it really doesn't matter because they are racist. So disclaimer: I don't support the views. So, but how's the music? The music is actually really awesome. Fortunately, none of the themes on the album actually seem too much about race. If they are, then I missed it. But if you can separate the art from the artist and really just soak in the sound, you're going to be treated as something really nice here. Because you've got a really nice sort of atmospheric black metal thing here, where the aggression is placed really well. And there are a lot of good solos here, which a lot of black metal doesn't have really all that great solos, but here you get some really nice chops. An example of a great track on here, Les Morts. I don't know how to pronounce it, I don't speak French, but it's got a really sick groove, and the vocals are pretty furious and awesome. And it feels as oppressive as the subject matter, I'm assuming. The second track takes a more depressing frame, and it is highly effective in that regard. Track 5 has one of my favorite tropes in black metal, where it's got this acoustic melody that crashes through with this black metal sound. It's very effective and really awesome. It's just the energy is all there. The last track is kind of interesting. It's a little experimental with how lo-fi it was. More lo-fi than anything else on this album. It feels extremely hostile, which, imagining Peste Noir, I'd kind of expect, and they delivered. So if you want an album that's angry and hostile and a little depressing, Peste Noir's full-length debut is a really, really good choice. To round off this chart, we've got the band Shining with the 5th album, aka Homestead. This is another depressive suicidal black metal album. And just a little context of the chart with this album at this point. I don't know when this chart was made, but there's plenty of good material in the 2010s to speak of. I think Gorgoroth has released new stuff, Enslaved has released new stuff. Of course, I know there's not repeats of artists here, but there are a few bands I'll discuss later that I think should have been represented. Anywho, Shining, depressive suicidal black metal. So the first track here starts off with a vocal sample before some of the most dismal black metal guitars I've actually ever heard are just pushed through. Now, I've seen this album described as progressive, which it's not really prog in terms of like jazz, but the sections are progressive in its nature. It shifts just deeper and deeper into the sadness. Something I thought about this album, it is the perfect album for today. If you watch this part by Halloween, this is a good album for you. It feels very gothic, very haunting. A lot of these screams, I love how they're altered in a way so that they sound even more wretched and pained. Another thing about these vocals, they seem kind of like a mix of the concepts behind Hvislis et As, where it's meant to be more pained, but they are a little guttural, kind of like Attila from Mayhem, which was a nice callback to earlier material I've already covered, which I missed those vocal tones. The longest track on here, the 4th one, starts off with these really nice orchestral strings, which I can always appreciate the experimentation brought by the newer black metal bands. Eventually they turn tremolo in a way that kind of drones, and while I was listening to it, I honestly didn't notice it switched to guitar, just kind of out of nowhere, and it was really awesome for what it did. The last track has this nice tremolo riff before it kicks into this sort of groove metal type riff, which was very different, but it managed to not pull me out of the tone of the album. It still felt very oppressive and dark and sad. So one of my favorite things about this album is how it ended. So it's going and going and going until this incredibly aggressive blast section hits where everything is loud and noisy, and then the album just done. Not exactly like it's cut off before like the music is done, but there's no long winding sort of like slow down portion. It's just like it's crash on the cymbal and it's done. Almost like the very album itself, his head was blown out the back. So yeah, this album was great. So there you guys go. That's the chart. Not a perfect chart, but a lot of great albums on here. That is for sure. Before I go, there are just a few albums I want to recommend outside of this chart to broaden your guys' views to stuff that really should be considered essential. One is definitely Mgwa's Exercises in Futility. This is a very sort of avant-garde, modern style black metal album that you hear a lot of nowadays. It's sort of a little more barking wretch type vocal style, and it's just really interesting. I think you guys might like it if you like a lot of the material here. I certainly loved it when it came out. Actually, in 2020, Oranssi Pazuzu released a sort of atmospheric black metal album that is really incredible. It's really hard to describe how it sounds, but that thing will terrify you. If you guys like Daughters, but you want black metal in it, listen to Oranssi Pazuzu. The band Watane's album, Casus Luciferi, is a little Migwa inspired. It's actually one of my favorite black metal albums. That thing is incredible. And the religious iconography in that album is really cool too. If you guys want more excellent depressive suicidal black metal, Woods of Desolation and Austere that I covered on my Black Ace chart are incredible. Don't argue with me in the comments about if you think they're depressive suicidal black metal or not. I've made my decision long ago. But also there's a band called Make a Change ... Kill Yourself. I don't advocate for that title. It's kind of a sketchy title. But their album 2 is really great. If you want some good pagan black metal, the band Droutran's Throne of the Depths is really excellent. Pisage de Verre, I mentioned them before, but they've got an excellent treasure trove of albums. Pisage de Verre should have definitely been on this chart. What album is up to you, but they definitely should have been on the chart, or he. It is one man. There's also no representation of the Greek or Irish black metal scene. I did mention Japan earlier, but these two scenes should have definitely been represented because they do have a significant scene. There's no Xasthur on this chart. Xasthur is another really good band. One band that totally should have been mentioned, especially with this one album, the 10th Sublevel of Suicide by Leviathan, is a really good album. That thing is brutal, it's fuzzy, it's unique. Would have been great on this chart. There are definitely a few spots that I could have totally seen taken out for Leviathan. So basically, that's it, you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. If you want to share this with your metal friends, go ahead. I'd love them to join the channel and see what I'm talking about. If you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, or just want to talk about black metal, because I know a lot about it now, comment down below or message me on my social medias. Go ahead and follow me. You're going to see a sick post today on Halloween. So basically, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys enjoy these picks. Right after I'm done talking, I will have a big section basically typed out of what the albums that I thought were great, good, or okay. Spoiler alert, most of these are great or good, only like a couple okay ones. So yeah, not a perfect chart, but I thought it was highly effective. Anyways, that's about it. I hope you guys have an awesome Halloween and a good day. Have a good one.